There's no global right to abortion. They have wanted to redefine the family. They wanted a crazy definition of gender, that gender is a social construct. And a small number of very persistent people over the years have managed to stop them. It is a lesson for everybody that a small number of very determined people can change history. A lot of people in the pro-life movement get a little discouraged. This is my advice to people. Don't get all caught up in wins and losses. Just enjoy this beautiful thing that has been given to you to do.
He rose through the ranks of Fortune, Forbes, and the Atlantic Monthly, along with the Rolling Stones. But a religious and political conversion changed the course of his life. Austin Ruse left New York media behind to volunteer with a Catholic priest, waiting for the chance to combine his faith and public policy. That chance came in 1997 when he helped launch CFAM, the Center for Family and Human Rights, a pro-life and pro-family advocacy group with official status at the United Nations. As their president since 2000, Austin has helped block a global right to abortion, defended the traditional family, and shaped international definitions of gender, all while proving that a small, dedicated team can influence the world's most powerful institutions. He's written 4 books, published over 1,000 essays, and advised diplomats from around the globe. A true example of faith in action. This is Living Pro-Life. Well, welcome, Austin. I'm glad you're on the program. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you.
Well, there's so much to talk about. You're with the Center for Family and Human Rights. That's a whole mouthful.
Yeah, actually our formal corporate name is CFAM, C-FAM. The longer name is Center for Family and Human Rights. We are a pro-life and pro-family advocacy group working primarily at the international level, primarily at the United Nations. We are in special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. And our primary work is assisting UN delegates in negotiating documents.
Wow, that's quite the level. We were talking beforehand. You've collected quite the bio. You've got thousands of columns and all these books you've written. Tell me a little bit about those.
Well, gosh, I've been writing for a good long while. I'm a biweekly columnist at Crisis Magazine. I was a biweekly columnist for a good long while at the Catholic Thing, published, in many other places, including newspapers around the world. I write mostly about political and religious issues, and I've written 4 books. My most recent is Under Siege: No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. My previous book to that was a book called Fake Science, and I wrote a book about 3 contemporary saints, children who's suffered greatly, died young, and brought many people to the faith. It's called Littlest Suffering Souls, Children Whose Short Lives Point Us to Christ. I wrote a book called The Catholic Case for Trump. I'm working right now on another book for Sophia Institute Press. But my primary work is at the international level. My team are simply amazing. We are about to go on retreat with 30 UN diplomats and their families in the mountains of Pennsylvania to strategize. We played a central role in blocking global right to abortion. We played a central role in blocking a redefinition of the family. We even played a role in the negotiation of a good definition of gender in international law. So that's our primary work, something that I was never formally trained to do and just stumbled upon after my religious and political conversion back in the 90s.
Well, your bio says something about you following a priest into New York City. So tell me that story.
Well, I was in the magazine publishing business in New York. I graduated from the journalism school at the University of Missouri and moved to Washington, D.C., to work for Teddy Kennedy. I decided to turn that job down and went into the magazine publishing business, which took me to New York. I worked at the Atlantic Monthly, Fortune, Forbes, Rolling Stone, experienced both a religious and a political conversion, thanks to a lot of people and our Lord. and walked away from the magazine publishing business and volunteered my time with a Catholic priest in New York named John Perricone, Father John Perricone, who is also a writer now at Crisis Magazine. And I helped him run a small catechetical group and then just kind of waited for something to happen. And the something that happened was meeting a young lady who had come in from Canada and was at the table, after Mass on Sunday. You know how people get together for a breakfast
Yep.
after Mass. And she said that she was in town. They'd raised a lot of money in Canada to open up a pro-life lobbying group at the UN. And at that moment, that's exactly what I was looking for. And about 6 weeks later, I was one of the employees. And about a year later, I was the president. And I've been the president ever since.
Wow. So this group you were talking about, you're now connected with the group that started in Canada. Is that correct?
Well, they raised the money in Canada and became incorporated in the United States in New York. It was back in the day in the late 90s when a lot of pro-life groups were being blocked from participating at the United Nations. This visionary woman named Teresa Bell, who was connected to Human Life International Canada, raised money to start a new group in New York City for the purposes of lobbying the UN. Many years later, we got official status with the UN and we wear fancy badges and we talk to diplomats. We have worked on pro-life issues at the United Nations every working day since August of 1997.
Well, I gotta ask this kind of elementary school question: is that most of the things I see in the UN are these people with all these headphones on, listening to all of these translations. Is that one of you as well?
During UN negotiations, I believe there are upwards of there's simultaneous interpretation is what it's called. And so, yeah, you put on the headphones, and if somebody on the dais is speaking, Russian, you can dial into the the English interpretation, or the French, or the Spanish, or whatever. So yeah, that is what happens at the United Nations during formal negotiations in one of the big rooms. Often the real hardcore negotiations happen in smaller rooms, and most of it is in English.
Interesting. So, from an outsider looking in, the United Nations seems like this big, huge behemoth, this thing that's somewhat untouchable. Like, we can kind of understand the White House and the Capitol, right? We can kind of walk up to it, and there's a lot of that politics. But the United Nations seems like something, somewhat foreign to most Americans. So tell us more.
It's funny. I remember I grew up in Columbia, Missouri. And I remember back then collecting for UNICEF at Halloween. I don't know if they do that anymore. These orange boxes that you would take around when you were getting candy. And I remember the doors, older gentlemen like I am now saying, UNICEF and the UN, they're communist. And we used to sort of chuckle at them. And now we know that they were right. The funny thing about the United Nations is that it is big. It is a behemoth. It takes years to understand it. And this is one of the values that we bring to UN diplomats, because they experience the same thing that you described. Is they step into the United Nations for only 3 or 4 years at the most. And so they don't know anything on the day that they arrive. And it takes them a good long while to catch up. And this is why my organization is so valuable in the debate, is because we've been doing it for so long. Most of my staff has been with me 14, 15, 16 years. And, they are world experts on the system at the United Nations, the ways of negotiating, the documents, the historical documents. We can talk in depth about what the Beijing Platform for Action said from 1995. The pro-life and pro-family movement at the United Nations was really created by John Paul II. Prior to the Cairo conference in 94, he asked people of faith to come to Cairo and assist. And 500 or 600 regular people answer that call, including the woman who raised the money and founded CFAM. So it became very obvious in those days that there needed to be an office of people working on this full time at the United Nations to gain the expertise. And so that's what we did. So yeah, we help UN diplomats understand this great big monster of an organization. Let me just digress here just for 1 second. The most remarkable thing about the American system is that I can drive 20 miles down the road to the U.S. Capitol, and I can walk into the Rayburn building and walk right into my congressman's office, and I can ask to see somebody, and they will.
Yep.
At the United Nations, you can't do that. You need a special badge to get in, and often you can't even then get into negotiations. So it takes a good long while to understand really what's going on, the shape of things, what is the UN really about, what are they really talking about, and that's the body of knowledge that we built up over, now 29 years.
Now, you had mentioned briefly earlier in the program, specifically about some of the work that you were doing. Some had to do with gender definitions. So talk a little bit about that.
Not a lot of people know this, but there are two definitions of gender. One was at the Beijing Women's Conference in 1995, and that definition is gender is to be understood as it has traditionally been understood. And that's not bad. And then a few years later, there was a negotiation to create the International Criminal Court. And the document is called the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court. We participated in those negotiations, and that's a hard law document. As you know, Beijing is a soft law document. It's not enforceable. And the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court, there's a hard law definition of gender, which is men and women in the context of society. A lot of people don't know that there's a very good definition of gender in international law. It doesn't stop the feminists from doing what they're trying to do at the United Nations and elsewhere, but there is this definition that we fight to defend all the time.
Yeah. So where are things going? Is it getting any better at the United Nations? Is it going to get any worse? Where is it getting better and where is it getting worse possibly?
Well, I mean, the remarkable thing about the United Nations is these negotiations work by consensus, meaning it's generally not taken to a vote. I mean, we could probably win a lot of votes at the United Nations on social issues that we care about. But generally, consensus means that if you get enough countries to stand up and say no, in the early days of the UN, that was 5 or 6 countries. Now it's 50 or 60. You can stop a global right to abortion. There's no global right to abortion because we have stopped it. There's no redefinition of the family because we've stopped those efforts. Sexual orientation and gender identity is not a new category of non-discrimination because we have made it so. So it just shows what a small group of dedicated people can do, even over against a behemoth like the United Nations. And when I say the United Nations, I'm primarily, the UN agencies, they're huge, UNICEF and the WHO, and there's billion-dollar agencies called UN Women, but also over against powerful countries and powerful institutions like the European Union. We have won so far. They have never given up. We're heading into the General Assembly here in a few weeks, and all of these issues will be live. And that's why we're meeting with 30 UN diplomats next week in the Poconos to go over the evolving agenda in the General Assembly and what to do about it.
So you mentioned the phrase international law several times, and I think a lot of the people listening wouldn't really understand that, probably even my kids who are maybe watching this later on. And tell us, how is international law enforced? Does the United States come in and enforce that, or other groups enforce that somehow? I mean, once you get into international waters or even to other countries, I mean, how is that even enforceable?
Well, that's one of the dirty little secrets about international law is it really is not enforceable. Because I mean, nobody's gonna, invade another country over questions of international law, particularly over these very controversial issues. But the way that it works is that, for instance, there is, as I say repeatedly, there's no international right to abortion, but UN committees say that there is. And so what they will do, I mean, we win all of these debates. All of these documents that we negotiate, they try and we stop them. But these documents are then turned over to bodies of the UN who then go to countries and say, you have an obligation under international law to change your laws on abortion. And they do that all the time. So the way that international law is enforced, which is really the wrong word, is it's coerced upon governments through the legal system. So there will be lawyers in their country A, and they will say, we have a treaty obligation on abortion. We have to change our laws. There will be friendly judges who will say, oh, that's correct. So we have to change our laws on abortion. Or they'll try to change it through their parliaments based on these phony claims of international law.
Let's take a step back here. So how does the work of the United Nations impact the United States directly?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're in a much better place than we are now, than we were, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I'll give you an example. The Supreme Court overturned what's called the juvenile death penalty. That is putting people to death who committed crimes under the age of majority. When they decided that, now, many years ago, they cited documents of the United Nations, which we've never ratified. And precisely as I've described it happening around the world on the ground, this happened here in the United States. They cited the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we've never ratified. They cited a part of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which we have ratified. But the part that they cited was a part that we reserved on. That is to say, we do not accept this part of it. So that's really the threat, is through the courts. The Obergefell decision, for instance, many of the amicus briefs cited international law, phony definitions of international law. So that's really how it happens here in the United States. In other countries also, it's through the courts. And so that's the threat. And there are also bodies around the country. And there's something called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, shorthand, we call it CEDAW. There are CEDAW committees. We've never ratified this treaty, but there are CEDAW committees in most major cities who push the ideas of CEDAW. This is how it happens. And this is the threat.
Incredibly interesting. So tell us how this impacts us. Our audience is mostly pro-life, mostly going to be asking about the topic of abortion.
Yeah.
And so tell us about international abortion. So, we spent a lot of time worried about Roe versus Wade and eventually the Dobbs decision. And then, now we have to deal with this both at the state level and federal level. And there's all these different fronts. But how has that impacted around the world? Because I know, Japan is dealing with this and China is dealing with this. And they were pushing abortion like crazy for decades. And now they have a population issue as a result of that. So how has that impacted around the world?
We have followed the population issue now for 30 years. I remember sitting in on an expert group meeting at the United Nations on fertility, on demography, almost 30 years ago. The question before these experts was, how low can fertility go? And 30 years ago, the answer to that question in this expert group meeting was, we don't know. And you know what? We still don't know. Because the replacement rate is still dropping like a stone all over the world, including in Muslim countries. The steepest drop of fertility of any country in history was in Iran. So the Muslims are not immune to this either. So the abortion question is a very serious problem all over the world, and one of the engines of this are bodies of the United Nations telling government that they have to change their laws on abortion. It happens from treaty monitoring bodies at the United Nations. It happens from the World Health Organization. It happens through this organization called UN Women. UNICEF is bad on this issue. So it's like these poor countries all over the world are being forced and coerced by UN bodies telling them that they have to change their laws on abortion. One of the most remarkable things about the United Nations in recent years is who has stepped up to defend life, faith, and family at the UN, and it's mostly poor countries in Africa. One of the great heroes right now in UN negotiations is the ambassador from Burundi. Burundi is terribly poor, and they need as much aid money as they can get, but they are willing to stand up to the UN and the European Union and say no on these issues. And who doesn't stand up is powerful countries like Hungary. Catholic countries like Poland won't stand up to the UN on the abortion question, even though Hungary has spent many, many years convincing American conservatives how great they are. And in many ways they are, but on the life and family issues at the United Nations, they're no better than France or Germany or the United Kingdom. So the abortion question is a very serious problem around the world, and governments well and truly are starting to panic about the inverted demographic pyramid that they're all experiencing.
Well, so the question is, if these institutions, if you will, who have been pushing abortion and contraceptives and all of these sterilizations around the world for so many different years, isn't it obvious that there's not an overpopulation issue anymore, that it's an underpopulation and there's a fertility rate crisis, I think, in the entire world. So why would they continue to push these types of policies?
That's a really good question. I mean, the fact of the matter is the global population continues to rise, and so that has them alarmed. And they use various excuses over the years. I mean, the one that they use the most in recent years is so-called climate change. That unless global population shrinks, we're all gonna die by fire or something like that, or people are gonna starve to death. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt that they really truly believe that the world is harmed by the number of people that are here. But it is quite amazing that most people can see the danger that is right around the corner. I mean, for instance, look at Japan. Japan's cities are becoming depopulated. There are parts of Tokyo where old people are living alone and they die alone, and it's discovered because of the smell, and they bring in cleaners, and nobody wants to buy the house. I mean, there are empty houses all over major Japanese cities. This is going to increasingly happen all over the world. Why do they do it? It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know.
Well, on that, I think we are running.
We're done. No, I have to leave you with some kind of wisdom.
Well, Austin, tell us the good news. What is the good news from CFAM and the work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, the good news is, as I've said, I mean, we are frontline soldiers in the UN debate. I mean, we're not the only ones. We're over the years, we're the only one at full-time at the United Nations, although ADF has an office there. But there's no global right to abortion. I mean, we have stopped them. They have wanted to redefine the family. We have stopped them. They wanted a crazy definition of gender, that gender is a social construct. And a small number of very persistent people over the years have managed to stop them. It is a lesson for everybody that a small number of very determined people can change history. A lot of people in the pro-life movement get a little discouraged because this is my advice to people, is don't get all caught up in wins and losses. Just enjoy the work. You know what I mean? It's like, just enjoy the game. It's like when my guys go into a negotiation at the United Nations, you can feel the air go right out of the room. They're going, oh no, it's not those guys again. And so the same is true everywhere. And so my advice to people in the pro-life movement is don't get all caught up in wins and losses. Just enjoy this beautiful thing that has been given to you to do.
Wow. Now that's the way to end the program. That's for sure. Well, Austin, we have a lot of listeners who are here in the state of Missouri as well. And so,
go Tigers.
Yeah. Born and raised here is right. Born and raised here in Missouri.
I was actually born here in Virginia, but I was raised in Missouri, Kirksville, Columbia, St. Charles High, class of 74. Pirates.
Incredible. So, hopefully maybe you'll come back again sometime and we'll see you in Missouri. Otherwise, we'll see you in Virginia or somewhere around the country. So thank you for all your work, and thank you for being on the program.
You're most welcome. Be well.